Hi, thanks for joining us this evening. I've got Mona here with me and I will hand over to her in a moment. The mics are muted tonight and you will be able to use the Q&A function if you've got any questions. The recording will be recorded and we will share with you in about a week's time. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Mona now. Thank you.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you, Natalie. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Great to be here with you. So today I'm going to be talking about education and how we make a difference to the world through education. Just so you know a little bit about who's speaking to you, I am Dr. Mona Sark. So I am a senior lecturer in early childhood and education at Middlesex University. And I'm really passionate, as you can tell, about particularly education that happens in the earliest years of life. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on in the lecture today. I'll speak for about half an hour. I'll try and keep it quite brief and quite punchy so that we have lots of space for dialogue and questions at the end. So the lecture is called Be the Change, because this is really about how do we make the world a better place, one child at a time, through the vehicle of education, and in particular through outstanding early childhood education. So I'm going to be thinking about the why. Why does early childhood education matter so much? Why do we have to get it right in order to create a better society? And then I'm going to talk you through how we know that we can make that difference through early childhood education. So the research that shows us that if we invest in those very early years of life, that we can make society a better place. We can make it a fairer place where more children can go on to lead successful lives. And then I'm going to link it to you. What does it mean for you? And kind of open up the possibility that you might want to be an educator that makes a difference to the world in this kind of way. And then we'll have time for questions and answers. Okay, so why? Why does early childhood education matter so much? Why do we need to be sure that we get it right? This is a picture of my son, Ramee. So I have 3 young children. Ramee is now a little bit older than he is in this picture. In this picture, he's about 6 or 7 months old, okay? And at this point in his life, he's a baby, obviously. He's tiny. He's new to the world. But at this point in his life, every second of his existence, more than 1 million new neural connections are being formed in his brain, okay? So in the second that I take this photo, there are 1 million neural connections forming in his brain, okay? And we shape, of course, those neural connections. So let's think about what's going on for him in terms of language and communication, for example, at the age of 6 months. Now, a 6-month-old baby is not speaking. They're not using words yet, but they're doing so much in terms of communication. So already they're doing things like turn taking. So they're saying to you a kind of response through their sounds to what you say to them, right? So you might go ba 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 ba, and they say ba 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 back to you. Okay, so there's this sense of a turn taking, which is the basis of every single conversation that we have in the world. Turn taking. Okay, they're also learning these sounds and starting to understand, how do I make these different sounds with my mouth? What's the difference between making the sound of but, making the sound of duh, making the sound of t, and they're exploring all of that. And of course, they're taking on this wealth of meanings. So when mummy or daddy says ball, they mean this object. When mummy says cup, she means this object, okay? So they're taking on all of this language and this communication. And we can't underestimate how important that is. Okay, so it might sound like a baby babbling, but actually this is the basis of conversations, and therefore it's the basis of our relationships with others, and it's the basis of our communication in the world. Okay, so many of our social and emotional skills in the world are actually taking off for a baby in those kinds of moments. So with those neural connections are the foundations of what we need to do as human beings in this world, and particularly how we need to socialize with others. Now, the adult's role in this is crucial, okay? The baby forms these neural connections and forms the foundations of communication, not in a vacuum. They wouldn't. If they were in a vacuum without social contact around them, without adults supporting them, those things wouldn't take off. An adult supports the baby to learn these things through stimulation. Okay, so that kind of natural instinct that we have to hold a baby and to smile and to coo over the baby and to babble with the baby and make silly noises at the baby, that's all stimulation that we're providing. There's an evolutionary reason why we're doing that thing, why we have that instinct. We're also, of course, responding. So, you know, very early on, parents are attuned to the sounds that babies are making and they're reading meaning into them. So baby might point at the age of about 8 months and go, cut, cut, cut. And a parent is likely to step in, the cup, you mean the cup? Here's the cup. Okay, so that kind of responsiveness is really important. And that follows from this attunement, this kind of knowledge and deep knowledge and understanding of the child as they get growing. And of course, surrounding all of this are these warm and caring relationships. Yeah, so anybody, including babies, can only really learn when their emotional and their social needs are being met through warmth, through love, through affection. Okay, so all of that kind of wraps around. Now, that's amazing, isn't it? The brain has these neural connections firing all of the time, 1 million every second for a baby of that age. Now, that's amazing, but things can go wrong. The young brain is particularly sensitive, okay? The young brain is what we call plastic. That means that it moves and it changes, not that it's the material of plastic, but that it is malleable. It molds depending on experience. Now, that's really exciting because that's what enables all of the learning to occur. But the flip side of that is that if the early learning environment isn't right, and if there are things going wrong in that early learning environment, then growth of those neural connections might be limited, they might be damaged, okay? And we have lots of evidence of what happens to the brain and what happens to cognitive and social and emotional and physical development when actually we don't get that early learning environment right. Now, one of the key findings in recent years has been around the impact of toxic stress on a baby or a child's biological processes and then neurological processes. So those are the processes affecting the brain, okay? Now, not all stress is bad, okay? Everybody experiences stress sometimes, and babies are no different. Babies will experience some stress, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So positive kind of stress might be when a baby who is not yet mobile is trying to reach for something and they really want to get that thing, but they can't reach that thing. Okay, and they might get frustrated and make noises and start to kind of get agitated. That's a positive kind of stress, because recognizing the limitations of your ability and being able to kind of therefore push through those limitations and learn new things, maybe in this case, learn to roll over in order to get that object, that's a positive kind of stress. So we do need that sort of stress for learning. A tolerable kind of stress might be if, and I've been in this situation as a mum many times, maybe I'm cooking dinner and I've got my 3 young children are playing, and in the midst, the baby, Ramee, maybe he's crying about something. Maybe he can't get something that he needs. Maybe he needs a cuddle. Maybe he's hungry, okay? And because there's so much going on, I can't meet that need immediately. Okay, I'll meet it eventually. I'll get to it when I can get to it, but I can't meet it immediately. Now, this is what we call a tolerable level of stress. Okay, it's not fantastic, but it's part of life, and we can all cope with it. Okay, and we develop resilience and coping mechanisms to deal with this tolerable level of stress. Now, toxic stress is different. Toxic stress is when the needs are consistently not met. And so, for example, if a baby is left to cry for long periods of time, if a child is left without their emotional and their social and their physical needs met over long periods of time, and this becomes the dominant feature of a childhood, this is known as toxic stress. So this might be neglect, it might be physical or emotional abuse, it might be exposure to violence within the home. These are all examples of toxic stress. Now, toxic stress takes its toll on the body, okay? So toxic stress produces this cortisol response. So it's this hormonal response. And when cortisol is released, then it's released in all of us every so often. It's just part of a natural stress response. But if cortisol is released consistently over a prolonged period of time, it's bad for the body. In a nutshell, it weakens our immune system. It increases the chance of heart disease, of high blood pressure, of high blood sugar, of digestive issues, and it increases the likelihood that we will go on to face anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues. Okay, so toxic stress is something that we need to be really aware of when we're thinking about the early learning environment. Is the key thing that we're trying to protect children from, okay, when we're thinking about that early learning environment. Now, how does all of this relate to education? Okay, because most of this and most of the examples that I'm giving relate to the home. You know, I'm describing babies in the home environment. And adults in the home environment, we know that what they do is really important, okay? That the way that they shape the early learning environment is important. But we also know that adults that are in other learning environments are equally important, particularly when children are spending long portions of time with those adults, okay? Take the example of, you know, the nursery, right? So my child, Ramee, he goes to a nursery. So he's in the care of the nursery for 8 hours at least every weekday, okay? For 40 hours over the week. That's a huge amount of input and contribution that the adults in that learning environment are making. And all the same things apply. They need to be responsive. They need to be stimulating. They need to be deeply attuned, and they need to show that warmth and that care and that love and that affection. Okay, so this is why things that we're talking about happening in kind of the home life and, you know, in relation to parents and children, why they also matter for the adults that exist outside of the home environment, but are still really important for the child. Now, research backs us up on this. Okay, we have really systematic and rigorous research evidence that shows that early childhood education and the environment that early childhood educators provide matters for developmental outcomes. And in particular, I want to talk to you about one study that's really a kind of breakthrough study in the UK in relation to understanding the importance of early childhood education. and it's called the Effective Provision of Preschool Education Study, the Epi Study. Okay, now the Epi Study, what it did, it looked at 3,000 3-year-olds, and it followed them through for 4 years up until the age of 7. And what they did is carefully map out for these 3,000 3-year-olds the types of preschool experience that they were getting. Okay, so some of those 3-year-olds were not going to preschool at all. They were just learning at home. Okay, some of them were going to nurseries that were considered to be good, outstanding places of education. And some were going to nurseries that were considered to be less effective, that were judged to be less effective learning environments. And what they did was chart the children's development across these different types of preschool education over the next 4 years to see, does it make a difference? If you went to a good nursery, are your outcomes better when you're 6 or when you're 7? And in fact, since this study, they've gone on to trace those same 3,000 individuals all the way up to the age of 15, which is the age that they are now. Now, the key finding from the study, and why it's really an important turning point for thinking about early childhood education, key finding is that high quality preschool education impacts positively on children's development and their outcomes. So you can look at, for example, the reading age of a 7-year-old, and if that 7-year-old went to a high quality preschool environment, they're more likely to be doing well in terms of their reading age, or in terms of their maths, or in terms of their physical development. Their outcomes are all improved. I'm going to return to the next bullet point, particularly because I think this is key, but just to flag it here, that that's particularly the case when you're looking at children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Okay, so children whose families have less money feel that effect more of the high quality preschool environment. It makes more of a difference to their developmental outcomes. Now, it's not just any nursery that has this effect though. So key finding from the Epi study was that it had to be high quality provision. And they looked at what does that mean? And it was all about the interactions between the child and the educator. It wasn't about how fancy the nursery was. It wasn't about, like, you know, how many toys do you have and how big is the space and how much outdoor space do you have? You know, those things might matter. But actually, the key finding here was that what really made the difference was the educator. And in particular, it was the extent to which educators were warm towards children, how responsive they were, and how stimulating they were. Okay, so it comes back to that screen of, you know, the mother and the baby interacting with each other, the parent and the baby relationship. It's the same thing with the educator and the child. You've got to have the warmth, you've got to have the responsiveness, and you've got to have the stimulation in place. Now, how does all of this relate to making society fairer? Because that's where I started out. I said, I'm going to take you on this journey to see how education can be a vehicle for making the world a fairer place, a better place. Essentially, it comes back to this finding that I mentioned, that high quality preschool education is particularly important for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Okay, so it's the children who need the most input that benefit the most from having really excellent early childhood education. Now, I just want to pause at this moment and kind of distinguish between what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. Okay, so we know that the poverty or the wealth of your family makes a huge difference to predicting your level of success. Okay, now that is not to say that poor parents are bad parents. I am definitely not saying that. In fact, all of the research shows us that it's not what your parents are, it's what they do, right? It's not the poverty itself that creates a setup where parents might not be able to provide what they would wish to provide for children. So that responsiveness and that warmth and that attunement. But we do have this relationship between poverty and poor outcomes, because the poverty is more likely to lead to experiences within the home that can produce that toxic stress that then leads to the developmental delays and the developmental disorders. Okay, so we call these toxic stress situations adverse childhood experiences. Okay, so when you have, and this is the roots of the tree that you can see on your screen here, when you have poverty, when you have discrimination, when you have poor housing, when you have violence, when you have crime, that creates a kind of adverse community environment, which then leads to some really, or can lead to some really negative experiences within the family, which in turn impact on the individuals within the family. So that might be maternal depression, it might be abuse, it might be substance abuse, it might be domestic violence, it might be mental illness, it might be neglect, and so on. Okay, so it's not the poverty itself that's the issue, but it's the fact that when people are poor, it's much harder to create a home learning environment for children that is free of these adverse childhood experiences. And when you've got these adverse childhood experiences in the mix, you have then a knock-on effect for children's learning. Okay, so this is where educators come in particular, because the children who are experiencing these adverse childhood trauma essentially depend on the adults outside of their home, including educators. First and foremost, I would say the educators, their teachers, to protect themselves against the impact of that toxic stress through the warmth, through the attunement, through the responsiveness, and through the stimulation. So if we want society to be fairer, a key way that we need to be having that impact is to intervene more in the childhood experiences of children from disadvantaged backgrounds, to improve those experiences by providing a really warm and loving and attuned learning environment outside of the home. And then that acts as a kind of protective factor against the toxic stress that many children might find themselves experiencing at home. This is where we bring in this model of social leadership. Okay, so here at Middlesex in the education department, we're really passionate about that role of the educator. Okay, so for us, an educator is not just about kind of academic outcomes. It's about changing the world one child at a time. It's about committing to making society fairer by providing excellent childhood education for all children. Okay, and particularly ensuring excellent outcomes for those from backgrounds of disadvantage. Okay, the other thing that we believe as part of this social leadership model is that it's down to everybody. Okay, that creating a vision for education, implementing that vision is not just about the manager of a nursery or the head teacher of a school. We think that on day one that you step into an educational environment and you begin to act as an educator, you're enacting that social leadership. You are making the difference to children's lives. Okay, you are making the world a better place. And it's really about every single interaction that we have with a child. Okay, because we know, as I was saying with the research earlier, that what makes the difference is the quality of the interaction. Okay, it's not about the fancy resources. It's not about amazing lesson plans, although those help. But particularly when we're talking about very young children, it's about having quality interactions with those children, where we're showing the level of attunement and responsiveness and stimulation that they really need in order to generate all of those amazing neural connections that are happening so early in life. I want to suggest and open up the possibility that that educator might be you. We definitely need more. Early childhood education at the moment is in a state of crisis, and I don't use that word lightly. We do not have enough educators in the sector. Okay, nurseries are going under because we do not have enough educators in the sector. And the educators that we do have need to be better, to be blunt about it, in order to make a difference, particularly to children from backgrounds of disadvantage. So I want to open up the possibility that you could be that person, okay, that you could have that impact on children's development and on their outcomes, that you could be the person that's responsive, that's warm, that's engaging. And just to kind of throw in there, a degree makes a difference. Okay, so for example, in the field of early childhood education, that same research study that I was telling you about, the Epi Study, showed us that high quality learning environments made the difference to children, and that it was people with a degree, it was educators with a degree that were really most likely to be in a position where they could provide that high quality learning environment. Okay, so you might be thinking about that journey, about to embark on that journey, and it connects into this bigger jigsaw puzzle of trying to make the world a better place, one child at a time. Okay, so taken about half an hour, which is what I said I would do. And I would love at this point to take any questions that you have, and I'll do my best to answer them. And where I can't answer them, then hopefully I'll be able to point you in the right direction. Okay. Natalie, are you able to field the questions, or shall I do that?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, great.
We haven't got any at the moment. Again, thank you for sharing that experience with us today. Has anybody got any questions? Be good to hear from somebody. Let's have a look. Can I ask a question then? If you could just put yes or no in the chat. I mean, have any of you visited Middlesex University or applied to Middlesex University? Or just thinking about it at the moment and doing your research? Is this the start of your journey? Here we go. Yes, visited and applied. That's good to hear. If you've got any questions, please let us know. And there was another one. What we got? How long is the course?
Okay, so it depends on the course that you want to do. So for early childhood studies, it's 3 years. For education studies, it's 3 years. For BA primary education with qualified teacher status, it's 3 years also. But we do also offer kind of postgraduate qualifications that are typically 1 year, and those are kind of entries into teaching for people that are graduates already. But all of the degree programs that we offer within the education department are 3 years long.
Okay, thank you. Some are just doing their research and some are considering it. So there's a mix of audiences here today. I'm glad that you're researching. I've applied but haven't had the chance to visit. And we do have some other open days coming up where and we have campus tours that happen on a weekly basis. Our campus is open tomorrow from 2 till 6, so you could come along then if you're able to, or there's an open day in June where you could still see the campus and meet the academics. Can I get the practical? Can I get the practical experience with the school I currently work at, or is it the placement decided by Middlesex?
Oh, great question. It depends on the course. Essentially, with early childhood studies and with education studies, yes, your placement can already be decided by you, essentially, and we will work with you in relation to that placement. When it comes to the BA primary education with qualified teacher status, then no, that is a situation where we organize the placements, potentially, working with you, but you will have a series of placements that you need to work through. And so not all of those will be in the school that you're currently based.
Okay, thank you. Middlesex is their first choice for primary education BA with QTS. That was that one. If I was to do education studies as a 3-year undergraduate degree, would I need to do another year to become a qualified teacher? I'm between education studies and primary education with QTS.
Yes, you would. And it's worth kind of taking some time over that decision, because they are really different as programs. So I teach on education studies. We take a much more holistic view of education. So we're bringing in psychology, sociology, philosophy. We're trying to understand what education's all about. Many of our students go on to be teachers, but many of them go on to become policymakers in education, civil servants, to work for kind of support services, family support workers. So it's really broad what people go on to from education studies. And we take that approach, that this is kind of to explore. The BA primary education with QTS is, we will turn you into a teacher. So it is very much, the outcome is about you becoming a teacher at the end. And there is a lot to get through in order to get you ready for teaching. And so it really depends on where you are in your heart, I think, around your kind of study and what you want to get out of your study. So think about the primary education with QTS as become a teacher package. Think about education studies as, maybe I want to become a teacher, but actually I want to explore this with a bit more openness.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more questions? Any more questions from anyone? I think we've answered them all. What do you think?
So I saw just in the chat that Gabby what course do you recommend? And Gabby, hopefully that answer that I just gave to the previous person kind of answers it a little bit. So in terms of that distinction between education studies and BA primary education with QTS, I've kind of picked up on that. And then we also have this early childhood studies program, which is very much for those who know that they want to work with the youngest children. And so we kind of classify that as 0 to 8, but predominantly 0 to 5 years old. Yeah, so if you really feel passionate that I want to work with very young children, then the early childhood studies program is the one to keep your eye on.
Thank you. I think I can't see any more in the chat or in the Q&A. Let's have a look. No. Oh, it was really helpful explanation. Thank you. That's why I've applied to the course with no QTS. Thank you. Has anybody else got any more questions? Shall we wrap up now? Happy to wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to say, guys, my email address is on the screen. Very happy to kind of answer any questions that you have or have a chat about what you're thinking through. So do just make a note of it, and always happy to hear from you.
Okay. There's some. What is one of the most interesting modules in your opinion?
Oh, well, Daria, I'm going to be, I'll be biased towards the modules that I lead. I lead 2 modules that I think are fascinating. One is about play. So it's about why do we have this instinct as children to play? What do we get from play? How does play benefit us? What as adults should we do to support children's play? And that's really fascinating. And how has play changed over time? So kind of the rise of digital play, what's that actually meaning for children and meaning for families? And then the other module that I'm obsessed with is around creativity. So again, it's asking the questions about children's creativity and how do we actually support children to be as creative as possible. So those are the modules I'm drawn to, because those are the modules that I lead and that I teach on. But to be honest, there's something there for everyone. So in the first year of study, you really are looking at all the disciplines. So you're looking at kind of asking the big questions around the philosophy of education. What does a good education mean? What does it look like? But you're also getting really stuck in with the psychology of learning. So some of those things that we talked about today around neural connections, for example, those are being picked up on in those modules. So there isn't an uninteresting module on the course, in my opinion. And then, yeah, I'm particularly obsessed with those ones around play and creativity.
Any more questions? Let's have a look. Okay. Any more questions from anyone? Hopefully we've answered all your questions and helped you. Any more? Thank you so much. Really enjoyed this virtual lecture. Thanks for joining us.
Fabulous.
So I'm going to wrap it up now. So as I said at the start, thanks for joining us. It will be recorded and shared with you all afterwards. In about a week's time, you'll get the recording. And again, as my colleague Mona just said, if you've got any questions, please get in touch with her. And if you want to see the campus, we are open tomorrow from 2 till 6, or on Saturday, the 11th of June, we've got an open day. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.